Did you know that Lee Chaolan's parents died when he was only a young child, and so he then lived in the streets as an orphan? Welcome back to another video, fellas, and today I will give you some very cool details and a brief explanation about Tekken's Lee Chaolan. So are you ready? Let's go! First things first, Lee was found in a Chinese city and adopted by Heihachi Mishima, so as to be the rival of his son Kazuya. Despite growing up with a Japanese Mishima family, Lee Chaolan is in fact originally Chinese. However, when Heihachi adopted him, he obviously brought him back in Japan. Next, Lee moved to the United States. Even though Heihachi never seemed to take much interest in Lee, he did in fact give him some power over the American branch of the Mishima Zaibatsu. And so when Lee was old enough, he moved to San Francisco, probably sometime before the first ever Tekken tournament. Now here's a very cool detail and why I believe Lee Chaolan is one of the very best fighters there is in the Tekken series. We all know that when Heihachi adopted Lee, he made sure to teach young Lee the Mishima style karate. And so if you take a closer look, you can see that some of Lee's moves are inspired by the Mishima style. However, when Lee moved to the United States, he went to train with martial law and Paul Phoenix, which is also a pattern if you take a closer look to some of Lee's moves, like this one, which resembles very much that of martial law. As a matter of fact, Martial Law's restaurant is also stated to be in San Francisco. Moving on. While living in America, Lee earned a reputation for himself in the fighting world and became known as a silver-haired demon. Even Steve Fox himself claimed that he respected deeply the silver-haired demon. So when Heihachi announced the first King of Iron Fist tournament, Lee saw this as a chance to beat Kazuya, so as to win sole inheritance of the Mishima Zaibatsu for himself. Ultimately, however, Lee lost to Kazuya in this tournament, likely in the semi-finals, after defeating King, who came third. After the events of Tekken 1, Lee was offered the position of secretary by Kazuya, who became the new head of the Mishima Zaibatsu after winning the tournament. Kazuya likely offered this position to Lee in an attempt to humiliate him, since Lee was in fact overqualified for this position. At this time, Lee seemed to have been deeply unhappy and was approached by Wang Jinrei, who offered to train him and encouraged him to work against Kazuya, who was increasing the corrupt practices of the corporation. When Heihachi was revealed to be alive, Kazuya called the second tournament in order to lure Heihachi out and defeat him. In the course of the tournament, Lee fought against Heihachi, who was furious that Lee had taken Kazuya's side and considered Lee to have betrayed him. And eventually, Lee lost to Heihachi. Now, it is unknown exactly what happened to Lee after Heihachi defeated him. But one thing is for sure, he was expelled from the Mishima Zaibatsu for siding with Kazuya. Although in Tekken 7, Lee noted that he was cast out of the Mishima clan itself, likely for knowing too much about Kazuya's devil. So then Lee disappeared and was absent from Tekken 3. It was then that he became the CEO of Violet Systems, a very successful robotics company whose aim was to create a utopian world where labor was carried out by androids. Lee himself lived in a private luxury mansion in the Bahamas and seems to have spent the last 20 years quietly building power and trying to keep off the radar from Heihachi. After initially being hungry for revenge, he saw the error of this way of thinking and instead distanced himself from fighting the Mishima legacy. Now, despite this claim, he did keep a careful watch on the Mishima Zaibatsu interests and was drawn back into the family's troubles after he noticed G Corporation stock prices plummeting, and so Lee's resentment for the Mishima clan and his interest in fighting was rekindled, and he took the opportunity to enter one of his robots, Combat, into the tournament, while he himself dyed his hair purple and went into the tournament under the name Violet. During the tournament, Lee was shocked to find out that his brother Kazuya was still alive. He was so surprised by this revelation that he lost his focus, and so eventually he lost the fight against Kazuya. Now, after the fourth tournament when Heihachi was announced dead, Lee schemed on taking over the Mishima Zaibatsu. And since Heihachi was assumed dead, he thought that Kazuya had won the tournament, and so Lee entered the fifth tournament to settle his score against Kazuya and claim the Zaibatsu for his own. And so Lee was again surprised on entering the tournament, as he found out that after all it was not being hosted by Kazuya, and that's probably when he lost interest and seemed to have withdrawn from the tournament and returned home to the Bahamas. Now after that, Lee had secretly been funding many anti-Mishima activities for some time, and when an opportunity arose when nearly half of the Tekken Force rebelled, led by a young captain named Lars Alexanderson, Lee funded the rebel army and would continue to provide them and their leader funds, information and secret bases of operation for the next two games. Lee is basically such a genius that during the events of Tekken 6 and Tekken 7, when Jin rose in power, Lee had always been observing and gathering info about pretty much every one of the Mishimas, and he spied on them using his satellites. Eventually Lee discovered that the young leader of the rebels was also Heihachi's illegitimate son, and so he realized that him and Lars are working together as brothers, against the Zaibatsu and G Corporation. Lee also helped fix Lars' android friend, Alisa Baskanovitz, and also helped him abduct Jin and keep him safe during Tekken 7. Lee watched his father's death via satellite, and eventually he sided with Jin at the end of Tekken 7 in order to help him defeat Kazuya. And last, personality. Lee is basically a charming ladies' man. Yes, he might be smug, but no one can deny that he has superior sense of class and he is not afraid to showcase his wealth. Lee is also extremely clever and an expert in robotics. And last, despite growing up alongside the malicious Mishimas, Lee is ultimately good-natured and only holds contempt for the Mishimas and their evil ways. And that's it. This is my breakdown for Tekken's Lee Chaolan, and I hope I gave you fellas an updated perspective on this great character. What are your thoughts on Lee? Do you like him? Let me know in the comments. Which character would you like me to do next? I've already done Jin, King and Steve, and you can find their videos on this playlist here. Before you go, make sure to smash like and subscribe. Until the next one, have an amazing time and I'll see you all later.
Excellent.